On my honeymoon, after my second season of shows, I met my wife. We got married and we were on our honeymoon. And she said, "What would you regret on your deathbed never having done?" And I said, "Writing a book and getting it published." And she said, "Okay, when we get home, you need to start spending 2 hours a day, protected time, make that happen." And that's kind of the condensed 30,000 foot version of how it happened.
So joining us now and back by popular demand is Brad Thor. He's a #1 New York Times best-selling author. He's got 24 thrillers. The latest one, I'm going to hold it up here for everybody, the Shadow of Doubt. Okay, so let me tell you something. I don't know how you do this, but I do think that you have you could tell me if there's a crystal ball somewhere in that house of yours, because you're predicting events that happen prior to them happening, right? So everything in this book could happen, and I want to get into that. It's brilliant to have you here. I'm a big fan. My mother-in-law is a big fan. And I will point out to everybody that Brad is a good guy. He wrote a very nice inscription to my mother-in-law, which made me look good. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, but let's start with you, because I want to refresh everybody with your background, how you got into writing these books. And this is obviously a labor of love for you, but you weren't always doing this. And remember, I'm going to ask you to color this, where I have a lot of young people listening to this podcast,
Sure.
Brad. And how do you go from what you're doing, which is a traditional thing, to something that is a labor of love? And when did you make the leap and why?
Okay, so real quick, my family background, we're an immigrant family, so to speak. My grandfather was the first one born in America. We're from Scandinavia. My dad went into the Marine Corps so we could go to college on the GI Bill. And then I went to the University of Southern California to study business, to take over my dad's real estate development firm. He builds office buildings and hotels, and I hated it. I hated business administration. I would have rather taken a bullet in the head than to have sat behind a desk my whole life. And so I changed my major in college to creative writing and film and television production. And when I got out of USC, I had saved a bunch of money. I leased apartments in LA while I was in college. That's how I made money to help pay my way through, in addition to my old man helping me a little bit. But he was really serious about, we worked from a very young age in my family. I think my first job was like seventh or eighth grade. I started pumping gas up in Wisconsin in the summers. So anyway, I'd saved up all this money and I thought, I'll do something no American has ever done. I'm going to go to Paris and write a novel. Of course, tons of Americans have done this. That was just my running joke at the time. But
starting with Hemingway, but yeah,
exactly. And Henry Miller and on and on and on, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I got over to Paris. A friend had a room in her apartment, let me have it. And I was very afraid of failure. And so I got a couple chapters into that novel and I gave it up. I had that voice in the back of my head that said, why risk the embarrassment? Maybe the book's going to suck. Maybe nobody's going to like it. So better to not write it at all than to set yourself up for failure. And I gave into that voice. It was a mistake. But I traveled around Europe with the money I had saved and I saw all of these young people with backpacks. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And seeing my country from abroad, I always felt made me a better American. And I said, I'm going to get back and pitch public television on a travel show for young people, 18 to 34-year-olds. I came back. It took a long time, but I pitched them. They loved the idea. I got a show on the air called Traveling Light. I was the producer, the writer, the host. I used to make up names for the credit crawl. I used to take friends from high school and throw them in there and stuff because I didn't want to seem like a small-time operator. And on my honeymoon, after my second season of shows, I met my wife. We got married and we were on our honeymoon. And she said, "What would you regret on your deathbed never having done?" And I said, "Writing a book and getting it published." And she said, "Okay, when we get home, you need to start spending 2 hours a day, protected time, make that happen." And that's kind of the condensed 30,000 foot version of how it happened. And,
but there's a lot there, though, right? You have, my grandfather once said, if you pick the right spouse, focus on one, don't focus on many, they'll help you get to wherever you want to go. So your wife definitely helped you.
Amen.
The second thing there is you had something burning and some of us snuff that out. We get fearful. We're worried about our paychecks day to day and we don't want to take the leap. I always wanted to have my own business. So I was at Goldman making a lot of money, Brad, but I said, I got to go have my own business. I left. I took a 7-figure job to a no-figure job. And everyone thought I was crazy, but it was a better life for me because it fit my personality. It didn't hem me in. So has your writing fit your personality?
Well, I think so. First of all, that's that old poem that path diverged in the woods, and I took the path least traveled by, and it's made all the difference, right? You took your chance, I took my chance. Neither of us are going to wake up on our deathbed saying, "What if we'd only done this?" Years ago. So the writing, I will say this, Anthony, the character, my protagonist, Scott Harvath, and for those of your viewers and listeners who haven't read a Brad Thor book before, I tell people that my thrillers, because I've got the same guy in all the books, Scott Harvath. He's a former Navy SEAL that does very, very off the book stuff for the government. And I tell people that the books are like the James Bond movies. If the newest Bond movie is in your local multiplex down the street, you can go see it. Doesn't matter if you've never seen a Bond movie before. You're not going to miss out on anything. You'll get caught up real quick. Same thing with my books. So I tell people that Scott Harvath is kind of my alter ego, the same way I believe James Bond was for Ian Fleming and then Jack Ryan was for Tom Clancy. So I used to joke that he gets to do the things that my wife won't let me go and do. And if I say that in earshot of my wife, she said, "Well, I let you go to Afghanistan." And I said, "Yeah, we made sure all the insurance was paid up and all that kind of stuff." But my wife was pretty cool when I wanted to go over there and do some research. So yeah, he's my alter ego. So I get to have a lot of fun writing this character. So,
but you're talking to a lot of people. You're talking to intelligence sources. You're on the ground in places like Afghanistan. You're on the ground in other Middle Eastern countries, Asian countries. The stuff you write, and I've been to some of the places that you write about, including Afghanistan. I was a part of the business executives of national security for 5 years. So I traveled to Iraq, traveled to Afghanistan on troop support missions. The stuff you're writing about is real. And it's sort of like, I sort of feel like it's near nonfiction. Like some people are fiction writers, but you're near nonfiction, meaning it's coming up. Coming up is what Scott Harvath is doing in this summer's novel, except it'll be sometime in 2025. We'll have to deal with it. So let's set the scene without blowing up the book for people. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the plot and where Scott ends up.
So I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins.
Right, that's a beautiful word. I like that word.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons, and I will get to the book, but the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 set up something called their Analytic Red Cell Unit, where they invited creative people into D.C. to help them war game. They realized like the day of 9/11 that we got hit and Al-Qaeda was successful because we weren't creative enough, and they were determined never to let that happen again. So they brought in all these creative thinkers from outside DC. I was one of them to help war game different scenarios. And I refer to that as the Las Vegas of government programs, because what happens in the red cell stays in the red cell. I can't use it for any of my books, but they wanted me there for the way I drew up these scenarios. So with this summer's thriller, with Shadow of Doubt, I have a high-level Russian defector that crosses the border into Norway with a ton of secrets that could shatter the West. And at the same time in Paris, a French intelligence officer has discovered a huge secret within the French government. Can't trust anybody in his own government. So he set up breakfast the next morning with the CIA station chief in Paris, but he dies. He's murdered that night before he can get to the breakfast. And then we've got my character, Scott Harvath. He's just come off an operation to rescue an American hostage in Ukraine. He's taken a week. He told his bosses, "Don't call me, don't email me, don't text me. I'm not going to answer. I'm going to go to Norway and I'm going to meet up with my fiance and I'm taking a week off." Well, when he lands in Oslo, there's a CIA station chief there as well. And she says, "We know your fiance is going to debrief this Russian. We need to know what she knows and we want you to spy on her." And he says, "Up yours, I'm not doing it. I've never said no to my country before, but I'm not going to spy on my soon-to-be wife." And the CIA blackmails him into service. He has never said no to an op. This one he's blackmailed into. But there's a twist. He figures out how to turn it around a little bit back on the CIA. So that's the jumping off point for Shadow of Doubt.
So, friend or foe? I'm going to ask you I'm going to say a couple of names. You tell me friend or foe. Ready?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Vladimir Putin, friend or foe?
Foe, 100%, no question.
Okay. So why are all these Republicans so sympathetic to him then?
Well, so here's what's going on, Anthony. If you read, particularly, I don't know if you read Anne Applebaum's book, Autocracy
On
Inc. is her
autocracy,
newest
yeah.
one.
I
Twilight of
just bought that book,
Democracy.
actually. I've invited her on, actually. I just bought that book. It's a small little book.
Yep.
I saw it in Barnes & Noble. I purchased it. I haven't read it, but go ahead.
So Anne Applebaum, her book from 2 summers ago is Twilight of Democracy. So when you look at the Balkans and other places that have slipped into ethnic strife and conflict, what you find is that the one group that had been dominant, that had been the all-powerful group, as they start to slide into minority, they fight back. And they fight back and lose respect for the rule of law and all this kind of thing. They want to preserve their way of life no matter what. In fact, one of the most interesting statistics or determinants I heard for whether or not your county had somebody at the January 6th insurrection was whether there was a dwindling white population in your county. So that was one of the greatest determinants as to whether or not somebody from your county was at the January 6th insurrection, which is very interesting. So if you look at the Balkans and other places that have slipped into ethnic strife and conflict, and the minority trying to shove the newly minted majority out, that's what you see. Not even out, but to prevent them from rightly taking power. And that's what we've got here. So now with these people who feel their life is in their way of life is in danger, that the country's slipping away, all of that kind of stuff, they are gravitating towards autocracy. They want a strong man. I alone can fix it, sort of a person. And so they respect Putin. They like Putin. And let's face it, it is absolutely horrific that Trump holds up and slobbers all over Putin and Kim Jong-un and President Xi, all that kind of stuff. So that's where a lot of that nonsense is coming from.
Applebaum believes he does that because he wants to be them. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, I think if given the choice, yes. What kind of insane person says I want to be a dictator on day one? What kind of American citizen who appreciates the founding documents, the founding of this country, what America stands for? Right. Who would even can you imagine Reagan making a joke like that? I mean, that's insane.
No, I work for the man, and I saw how dangerous he was. And so they tried to discredit me the way they fired me and then roughed me up on the way out. Because they were like, okay, this guy sees exactly what we're doing. He doesn't like what we're doing. And so they went to discredit me. So I know exactly what they're doing. I just wrote a piece on Project 2025. That is Trump's agenda. He put 85 of his acolytes in there. But, he's up against, she has some hard left policies. So there's a lot of people in the middle that don't see it as clearly as you and me. And they're like, okay, well, she's got hard left policies. He's not hard left, but he could be an alligator that eats you while you're crawling on his back. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And so for Trump, it's not necessarily the policies he likes. He likes that there's no guardrails, that these guys can do whatever they want and nobody stands in their way. Exactly. Everybody falls in behind them, never in front of them and says, stop. That's what Trump likes about these guys.
So Putin is a foe. And I'm glad you said that because I've seen the intelligence briefings. I know what a foe he is. I know what he's capable of. And I always tell people that Putin's People, which was written by Catherine Belton. She was the former Financial Times Moscow bureau chief. H.R. McMaster, who has a new book out, he sent me during COVID in 2020 a copy of her book. I read it from cover to cover. Putin is a foe. President Xi from China, foe?
Foe, absolutely, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, this is one of the things with the populist agenda and kind of the American First crowd is they don't want America to project power or be involved in other nations, but they still want America to be number one. Those two are mutually exclusive. You can't sit behind your oceans and be number one. If we step off the world stage, Xi and China are going to step into that power vacuum. They are already doing it with the Belt and Road Initiative and have been up to it for decades. I think it's over 20 years now. So you can't have both. You can't be isolationist and number one. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay. Let's keep going. I'm with you, and you and I share the same philosophy, and it's evident from your books. And I'm an American first, and I'm a partisan last, actually. So I don't even recognize the party that I used to be a part of, which was Reagan and Abraham Lincoln's party. But
me neither.
Let's keep going, okay? So Scott has been through hell and back. He's a loner, but he's a friend. He knows how to bond with people. He is incredibly resourceful. Have you met people like this that work for the United States government? I know the answer to this, but tell us about them.
I have. So Scott Harvath, my main character, is basically an amalgam of people who I know that are out doing some of this nation's most dangerous business. You've got to be a self-starter. You've got to be charming when it's necessary to be charming. You've got to be able to work well on a team. But most importantly, they've got to be able to put you into some of the worst places in the world, and you've got to figure out how to adapt and overcome. And that's my protagonist, Scott Harvath.
Okay, and I agree with all that. Okay,
so far passing the test. Good.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing you've done well, and I want you to explain to people who are writers that listen, because this is an author's podcast. The title of the podcast is An Open Book, and it's really me interviewing best-selling authors. But you've done something really well here. I have read all of these books, so I feel like I know Scott Harvath. But then I try to step back and say, let's say I just read this book on its own. Let's say I read Shadow of Doubt on its own. I know the book. How do you do that? How do you write a series of books where I can pick up book 13 and I'm right in it, and I didn't have to have books 1 through 12, or I could pick book 24. Yeah. How do you do that?
So it's a high wire act, Anthony, because I've got people like you that have been with me since the very first book. And then I've always got new people coming on board. So how do I onboard those new people quickly without boring the old people that know the history of Scott Harvath? Elmore Leonard was famous for saying his advice to young writers: leave out the parts that people skip. So I've got to be careful not to put too much in there. So what I try to do is, when I'm explaining a little bit of Scott's background, is I find a new way to do it with each book. I tell maybe a little bit different thing from his past, which will be new to the existing readers, and of course brand new to new readers, but it serves two purposes. It gives the existing longtime readers a neat little piece of the puzzle of Scott's background, but it also serves to bring brand new readers up to speed, because my editor gave me a great piece of advice as I was going into book number 2. And she said, don't cannibalize your own sales. You never want somebody to walk into their local bookstore looking for that great beach read, and they say, oh, here's Brad Thor's book. Oh, this is book number 5. Oh, wait a second. If you haven't read the first 4 books, you can't buy this. And then they go buy a Patterson book or something like that. God help them.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be critical of him, but
and I'm just teasing. Patterson's a great guy.
Great writer. He's a great guy, great writer, but it's very cool. I can predict his books. There's a formula to his books. And if you read one of them, great. But if you read 10 of them, you're like, okay, I can see where this is going. I can see chapter 22 in chapter 4. Your book, I can't figure it out. So I have to actually read the damn thing. Good. I have to turn the page. And so that's my second question related to your writing style. You make it fresh and you make it relevant, and it doesn't matter which book I buy. I'm in the book. But then, because listen, I have read every spy novel that comes out. Okay, I mean, I'm a spy novel reader. Charles Cummings from the UK. You mentioned some of the other competitors you have, which I won't mention on this podcast. But you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
I can't predict what you're doing.
Good.
So what do? Do you say, okay, the reader thinks I'm going to go this way, let me go the other way, or what do you do?
So that's it. So first and foremost, my job is to entertain you. So I'm crafting short, crisp, cinematic chapters. In fact, one of the nicest accolades I get is, oh my God, I bought my son your book, or I gave your book to my mom who wasn't a reader, and now she is. She loves your book. She's gone back and read all of them. So what I try to do, there's 2 types of authors. You get somebody who's a plotter and they outline, or a pantser, somebody who flies by the seat of their pants and doesn't outline. And I'm a pantser. So now that can be tough. It can be really stressful, because I'll paint myself into a corner, and my wife jokes by the look on my face. She can tell if it's a red wine night or a bourbon night when I get home from the office. And she says, don't worry, you'll figure it out tomorrow. And then I'll come in and I'll work it out. But I like to say that I take the first of all, I want to have the same experience writing these books, Anthony, that you do reading them. Robert Frost said, no joy in the writer, no joy in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So what I want to have the same heart pounding, palm sweating experience writing it that you do reading it. So my rule is, if it's time for something new to happen in the book, I take the first 4 ideas that come into my head and I throw them out. Because if they're that obvious to me, they're going to be that obvious to the reader. And then I start toying with 5, 6, and 7. And that's where it gets interesting. And that's, I think, what keeps it fresh, exciting, and you don't know what's coming around the next corner.
Well, terrific. let's talk about the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm new to the world. I've just landed. My Martian spacecraft has landed. I'm in your backyard. I come into the house. I'm in your beautiful study. And I say, okay, tell me about this world that you're living in. Tell me about the intrigue that you are so on the pulse of, this international intrigue. So go ahead, give me a briefing. Tell me what's going on.
So you're talking about the real world that we're
The
living
real
in right
world,
now.
the real world, not the world that we teach our kids, not eighth grade social studies about America, but really what's happened in America and really what's happened around the world. And because let me preface it by saying this to you. I think you and I are two of the luckiest people that have ever lived. And let me explain why. We've grown up in a post-World War II America where America has run the card table. Maybe it's becoming harder to run the card table, but for 80 years. And we're still the reserve currency for the world, a result of which there's a ceiling, there's an unlimited, as George Bush's dad, George Herbert Walker Bush said, CAVU, ceiling and visibility unlimited. That's been the case for America for a long time now. But tell us about the world that you were living in. Give me a briefing. Say, look, here's what America's dealing with now. Here's where the Russians are. Here's how India's coming into the situation. Here's the Chinese. Here's what's going on with the Iranians and the Israelis.
Yeah, let's preface this on the aliens at least know that we are what the Westphalian nation state is, and that we've got different tribes. Let's say on this planet, we might be all of the same species, but we're not all of the same tribe.
Right. And just for young people, what Brad is referring to as the Treaty of Westphalia, we've really aggregated ourselves into sovereign nations. And we each have a sovereign nation that represents itself in the international community, and a result of which it's tied to certain respected international laws and norms, even norms in war. As an example, we have a Geneva Convention in terms of how we have to treat each other when we're in war. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. So I would tell the aliens that for the longest time on this planet, people thought that history repeated. And it's only of late that we're realizing that history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And I would back us up to 2014, where Putin, via his little green men, basically men in green fatigues that didn't have any insignias that said they were Russian military, though they were, went into the Donbass, basically went into eastern Ukraine. 2014 took it over. Now, what's really interesting is when the Soviet Union broke up at the end of the 90s, a third of the Soviet Union's nuclear arsenal was in Ukraine. And we went to the Ukrainians and said, please don't keep these missiles. Let us help you get rid of them. We're going to help you deactivate them. You don't want these. You don't have the wherewithal to maintain them. And the Ukrainians were smart. They said, listen, we'll do it. We'll agree to this, but we need a promise from you, the United States, that if we give up our nukes, nobody's ever going to invade us. Nobody's ever going to take our territory, and you're going to see to it. And the U.S. said, fine, we'll sign that. It was called the Budapest Memorandum. And they said, great, the ink is now dry. Get the Russians to sign it. This is pre-Putin. And the Russians did. But then Putin came to power. And what Putin did by going into the eastern part of Ukraine, he said he was there to help Russian speakers that were in that area, which is the same excuse that Hitler used when he went into Czechoslovakia. So when you see pictures of Neville Chamberlain waving around the piece of paper saying peace in our time, that's when they decided to hand over the Sudetenland, this area that had a lot of ethnic Germans, German speakers, to Hitler, thinking it would slake his thirst. So what I would tell the aliens is we are living through both an exciting and very perilous time in our history, because a lot of things that have happened in the past are happening again, not exactly the same way, but similar. Again, history doesn't rhyme, or it doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. But we're also living through things in history that have never happened before. So you had LBJ that didn't go for a second term, but the Biden thing, Biden's not going for a second term, but there's a flip now. It's Kamala Harris who's now stepped in, and it's a really short race. And the Trump campaign, although they say they were prepared for it, they weren't prepared for it, and they don't know how to handle this. So I would say, if I had to the Chinese are on the rise. They are becoming a near peer power. They have a very impressive Navy. We need to invest a lot more in our Navy. We need to be putting a lot more into icebreakers in particular. I'm very concerned about that's Coast Guard, but it is Navy adjacent. So the Iranians, I think I'm on hold with the Iranians because I was really expecting a lot more with Hezbollah and the Israelis. I'm glad not to have seen stuff, but I would tell the aliens, grab a beer, sit down. Let's watch the next X amount of weeks between now and Election Day in November, because I think not only are we living through one of the most exciting points in history, we live in the best country in the history of the world at the absolute best moment. If you were a spirit up in heaven, a soul that was waiting to be born, and you could pick any time in any place to be born, you wouldn't know if you were black, Jewish, gay, if you were paraplegic, if you were going to grow up rich, grow up poor. If you didn't know any of that stuff, just you could pick the time and the place, you would pick America right now, today. It would give you more advantages, more opportunities, and it's exciting. So we have roles and responsibilities as citizens because we're stewards of this republic. But I got to tell you, Anthony, I'm not a baseball guy. Politics is my baseball, and this is so exciting. So that's why I would encourage I would hope my enthusiasm would be infectious for the aliens.
Okay, so one follow-up question from the aliens. Okay, when I watch the American electoral situation, both sides think it's perilous. The Democrats think democracy is ending with Donald Trump, and the Republicans, or the people supporting Donald Trump, if you can call them Republicans, they think that we're going to end up with communism and Marxism in the country. So, are either of them correct, or neither of them correct?
So I don't believe, so I left the Republican Party in 2018. I worked on 2 Republican presidential campaigns prior to that. I worked on Rick Santorum's and Rick Perry's, still friends with both of them. Listen, Trump sat on his big orange ass for 3 hours during the insurrection, didn't do anything, could have called the people back because he wanted them to be successful. He was hoping that they would succeed. If you didn't want that to go on, you wouldn't be sitting there watching it unfold on Fox News. So he wanted that to succeed. The idea that we are giving him another shot at office is reprehensible. It's reprehensible.
That's Kevin McCarthy's fault, by the way, because McCarthy had him
down to Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ass.
He could have put him right through the ropes. Yep. And he would be running for president. He would be the most popular Republican since Reagan.
Trump could have been banned from office.
But think about this for 1 second. But hey, I'm the Speaker of the House. You're invading my house. Mm-hmm. Who would allow that? Only Kevin McCarthy would allow that. So anyway.
Only Kevin McCarthy. And then listen, there were 2 impeachments and nothing happened in the Senate. So there's a lot of Republican senators who have this on their hands too, including Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, but McCarthy could have broken. McCarthy could have gone to McConnell and Schumer and said, I'm done. You're not allowed to do that.
The dam broke, Anthony, when McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago and kissed the ring. I mean, McCarthy gives this big speech about how Trump is completely responsible for January 6th. And then a week, 5-7 days later, he's down in Mar-a-Lago. So McCarthy should not be remembered fondly by, listen, I love when he kicks Matt Gaetz in the pills. I love that. I think that's terrific, but I don't like McCarthy. That's about the only thing he does that I like. And I hope that history remembers him as poorly as he deserves to be remembered.
Well said. Okay. I mean, I'm loving this conversation, so I'm going to keep going. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about research. Okay. You're in Afghanistan. Something you learned in Afghanistan that you could not learn about reading about Afghanistan. Go. What is that?
Let's see. One of the things I learned about, and I had heard about it, but I saw it firsthand. There's this, the Pashto tribe have a code of honor called the Pashtunwali. And so with the team I was with, we didn't go into any village unless we had been invited by the elders, because they would fight to the last man in the village to keep you alive because you were their guest. And what was interesting is I was with this team and they were constantly introducing me as an author, as this American author. And I finally had to say, why do you guys keep telling them what I do for a living? Can't I just sit back here and let them think I'm one of you guys? And they're like, you don't understand. In Afghanistan, 2 of the most honorable and respected professions are doctor and author. So that was something that I'd never heard before that I learned in Afghanistan. Also, the best fried chicken I ever had was in Jalalabad, somebody's house.
Yeah. No, I love the food. I love the food. I definitely thought it was amazing. How about weaponry?
Mm-hmm.
Where are we going with weaponry?
Well,
What's coming that the average citizen is not aware of or not ready for?
okay, so there's a lot of underwater stuff that we're working on now. There's a big drive in the United States for in our military here, things that we could use against the Chinese in a confrontation with China, whether that's around the Philippines, which we are bound to help protect, or with Taiwan. So there's a lot of unmanned underwater stuff, which is very, very interesting. And also that's a big push with NATO. NATO is now standing up a new kind of security center or an operations center because they're very concerned about not so much non-state actors because it's hard for them, but actual states that are enemies of the West, severing the undersea cables that we rely on for data transfer and all that kind of stuff. So the undersea warfare is amazing. And I think that would really shock people, the advancements and how much money's going in there and the kind of stuff they're coming up with. It's incredible. Very sexy.
Okay. It's not your last book, right, Brad?
No, in fact, I just signed a brand new contract with Simon & Schuster for a few more. So happy to keep them going.
When you get writer's block, what do you have to do?
So, you know what, Anthony, it's funny. I had it several years ago when we decided to move our family back to Chicago from Park City, Utah. And I moved into a house that wasn't complete and it was just noisy and the kids and all this kind of stuff. And I had terrible writer's block. And I did some research, and the best piece of advice I've ever found, I've never found anything better than this. It's give yourself permission to write a crummy first draft. Okay. It's that desire to have everything be perfect that locks you up. And so if you have any talent at all, that crummy first draft's not going to be crummy. And there's a famous saying that you can't edit what hasn't been written. The tap needs to be open for the words to flow. So if you give yourself permission to write that crummy first draft, that is like a battering ram that goes through writer's block, which comes from perfectionism. That's where it stems from.
Okay. Amen. I've got 5 words for you. We're going to close it out with this. My producers and my team, after reading the book, I'm going to say 5 words. I'm going to say the word. You think of whatever comes to your head. Ready?
Yep.
I say the Pentagon. You say what?
Professional.
Okay. Conscience.
Courage.
I say the word service. You think of what?
Patriotism.
Okay. I say 2 words. Scott Harvath. Is that you, Brad Thor?
It is me to a large degree, but more than that, it's an homage to the men and women that go do some of this nation's most dangerous business away from their families. I tell people that there is no American dream without those willing to protect it. And then I go further and say, what does the American dream look like for those who do protect it? And that I wrestle with a lot in the books.
Right. Now, it's interesting because they do make incredible sacrifices. Mm-hmm. Okay. I say the 2 words, Brad Thor. You say what?
Junior. Because I think it makes me think of my dad, the Marine, and he's senior, and I'm Brad Thor Jr.
Okay. See, I see incredible life force. That's what I think. I see incredible life force, boundless energy.
Thank you.
Mr. Thor, thank you very much. The title of the book is Shadow of Doubt. It's another incredible thriller. Who is this good-looking guy on the back of this book, by the way? Is there any?
That's called digital Botox.
Is there any filtering going on there?
It's a 10-year-old. It's a 10-year-old photo. I need to get back in front of the camera.
God bless you. It's in bookstores now. The I don't know who the narrator is, but the audiobook version
Armin
is
Schultz. Thank you. Yeah, he's great.
He's been with you for a while because I recognize his voice. And the book is phenomenal. I wish you great success. And thank you so much for coming on Open Book.
Thank you. Good to be here. And please give all my love to your wonderful mother-in-law, Anthony.
All right, there you go. See, you know what you're doing, okay? You know what you're
In the middle of my first year in graduate school, my mom called me. My mom had gotten sick with breast cancer, and she called me and said, "You need to come home. I'm not doing well." And my mom's not a dramatic person, and I walked into a situation that was pretty frightening for me. It was like nothing I'd ever dealt with before. She'd been discharged from the hospital early, as some of these HMOs do. And there were certain things I just couldn't help her with. And I remember calling around trying to get a nurse, and nurses were $35 an hour, and we just didn't have the money. And I just remember what a feeling of kind of emasculation and humiliation it was was to be the only man of the house, and I couldn't take care of my mom, who had taken such good care of me. And at that point, I just realized I'm going to try very hard to develop economic security so I can take care of my mom. My mission wasn't to save the world. It wasn't to be a good person. It wasn't to create jobs. It was to get economic security. It was just super important to me because I felt like I had failed taking care of my mom, and it was just a very ugly moment for me. But that's really when I got my act together.
So joining us now on Open Book, we're gifted to have Scott Galloway. Professor Galloway is obviously a NYU professor, serial entrepreneur, best-selling author, among many other things, podcaster, brilliant thought leader for us here in the United States. But the title of his new book, bestseller, is called The Algebra of Wealth. I had the opportunity to read this book over the summer, Professor, and I enjoyed it. And so before we get to the book and some of the other things like your recent TED Talk, just for some viewers that may not know you, which I think is remote, but I think it's important for people to know your background, where you grew up in California, how you got into the businesses that you got into, and why you became a teacher.
Sure. So my backstory is pretty unremarkable. Raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary here, actually in Westwood. California taxpayers really lifted me up. I got into UCLA with pretty unremarkable grades, but I didn't test well either. But when I applied to UCLA, Anthony, the admissions rate at UCLA was 76%, and I was one of the 24% that didn't get in. And I was actually installing shelving in the Inland Empire, and the highlight of my day literally was in a closet all day. The highlight of my day was I would get ridiculously high with my coworkers and then take to the highways of Los Angeles. And I said to my mom, is this it? So I was very upset. And she said, well, let's see if there's an appeal process. I appealed. And I remember the admissions officer called me and said, you're not qualified, but you're a native son of California, and we're going to give you a shot. And that kind of started an upward spiral. I came of age during the internet in the 90s. I went to graduate school at Berkeley, and it just started a series of startups. Some failed, some worked. Then at a very young age, I was blessed with the curse of thinking, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I decided I wanted to teach, joined the faculty at NYU 22 years ago. I've taught 3,500 students, and then started slowly but surely making content, books, podcasts, newsletters, and that's where we are now.
So I guess the question I have, there was a moment for me. Okay, I was a wayward teenager driving my Camaro on Long Island. We're roughly contemporaries. I was chasing skirts and not caring about anything. I had good grades. I ended up getting into Tufts. My father cashed in his life insurance policy from his union to give me $10,000, Scott. And I can remember the day he handed it to me. It was April of 1982. He handed me the check, and he said, this is really all I have to help you go to college. And that was a big moment for me. I was like, all right, this is super important to my dad that I not screw this up. And then I made a academic commitment in college, which saw me to the Harvard Law School and saw me out the door to Goldman. Was there a eureka moment for you? Was there something between you and your mom? Was there something between you and yourself where you said, okay, I've got to start this upward spiral as opposed to meandering?
100%. And it's a generous question. I was in graduate school, kind of been sleepwalking through life up until that point. I had a 2.27 GPA out of UCLA, was at Morgan Stanley for a couple of years, talked my way in there, but didn't like it. So left, was living again at home with my mom, got into graduate school. In the middle of my first year in graduate school, my mom called me. My mom had gotten sick with breast cancer, and she called me and said, you need to come home. I'm not doing well. And my mom's not a dramatic person. And I walked into a situation that was pretty frightening for me. It was like nothing I'd ever dealt with before. She'd been discharged from the hospital early, as some of these HMOs do. And there were certain things I just couldn't help her with. And I remember calling around trying to get a nurse, and nurses were $35 an hour, and we just didn't have the money. And I just remember what a feeling of kind of emasculation and humiliation it was to be the only man of the house, and I couldn't take care of my mom, who had taken such good care of me. And at that point, I just realized I'm going to try very hard to develop economic security so I can take care of my mom. And I wasn't, my mission wasn't to save the world. It wasn't to be a good person. It wasn't to, It wasn't to create jobs. It was to get economic security. It was just super important to me because I felt
Right.
like I had failed taking care of my mom. And it was just a very ugly moment for me. But that's really when I got my act together.
It's interesting. Yeah, that's like me. I was searching for economic security, but you and I grew up in a different America, Professor Galloway. Okay. And I want to go to your TED Talk for a moment, which is titled How the U.S. is Destroying Young People's Future. I've heard you say this many times. I've watched many of your interviews. You and I have had personal conversations about this, that American males are struggling.
Yep.
Youth in general are struggling. Give us some of the stats that you often cite and tell us why this is happening. What is the cultural change in the United States that's contributing to this?
Well, let's go back to UCLA. When I applied, the admissions rate was 76%. Today, it's 9%. When I graduated from business school, I made $100,000 a year, and the average house in San Francisco cost $280,000. Now, the average salary is $200,000 total compensation, and the cost of a house is $2.1 million. We have purposefully decided to artificially create scarcity around housing and colleges. How many people do you hear, I would never get into the college I applied to, if I applied today? Well, that means your daughter's not getting in. A lot of these universities sit on the endowments of a small Latin American nation, yet they purposely constrain the number of freshman seats because it makes them feel important, and also the alumni like it. Because if all of a sudden I own a home, I get very concerned with traffic. And one of the great problems in America is that housing permits are put in the hands of owners versus public officials. So we've had 1.5 to 3 million fewer households built every year than we've needed. The result is that the primary lubricant for upward mobility and means of kind of forced savings and starting a family and really the march towards adulthood, buying a home, have been put out of reach. It used to be just pre-pandemic, 2/3 of people could afford a home. Now it's 1/3. Pre-pandemic, homes were $290. They've gone to $420. With the acceleration in interest rates, the average mortgage has gone from $1,100 to $2,200. Again, taking it from 2/3 of people that can afford a home to 1/3. Every economic policy, I believe, Anthony, is nothing but an elegant transfer of wealth from the young to the incumbents to the old. Two biggest tax deductions, mortgage interest rate and capital gains. Who owns homes and stocks? People our age. Who rents and makes their money from current income? Young people. So the result is the average 70-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average person under the age of 40 is 24% less wealthy. 60% of 30 to 34-year-olds 40 years ago had at least one child. Now it's 27%. And that in concert with social media, with the outsourcing of jobs across industries that especially give young men an on-ramp into college who aren't cut out for college. And we knew that person could take wood shop, auto shop, metal shop, get a decent job in a factory, in manufacturing. Those jobs have dried up. So we now have essentially are raising the most obese, depressed, anxious, and addicted generation in history. For the first time in our nation's history, first time, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. So there's the trope that the young people are entitled. No, they're entitled to be enraged. Take COVID, and I'll wrap up here, $7 trillion stimulus plan, 85% of it wasn't needed. 85% of it wasn't spent, which meant it went into the market, which took housing prices in the stock market to record highs, which was great if you were an incumbent. But if you're an entrant, it just made everything more expensive. When you bail out the baby boomer owner of a restaurant, all you're doing is robbing opportunity from the 26-year-old recent graduate of a culinary academy. We need churn. We need disruption. The reason I'm here at the Beverly Hills Hotel and with you is because in 2008, we bailed out the banks, but we didn't bail out the economy. So as I was coming into my prime income earning years, got to buy Netflix, Amazon, and what was the third one I bought? Apple at between $8 and $12 a share, and they're up between 30 and 60 fold. Where does a young person find disruption, churn, and opportunity now? So we have embraced this rejectionist LVMH strategy where we artificially reduce housing, we artificially reduce college admissions, and young people, as a result, just don't have nearly the opportunity we did. The closest they get to prosperity is they get to throw their credit card into the club where I'm doing rails and champagne, and I run up their credit card. We have lost the script. We're no longer making the types of forward-leaning investments previous generations used to make.
So, I mean, that's the LVMH strategy that you talk about. Tell us a little bit about what you mean when you call it the LVMH strategy for higher education.
Well, LVMH could make more Dior bags. They could make more Rimowa suitcases. These aren't difficult items, or Vuitton bags. These aren't difficult items to manufacture. But the key to desire is scarcity. When we came off the Savannah, there were a variety of items that were scarce: sugary, salty, fatty food, mating opportunities, opportunities for free, safe play. So scarcity, sexiest word in the English language is no. The moment you sense there's too little of something, you become obsessed with it. So when I walk into the Panerai store in Aspen, they tell me whenever watch I look at, limited series, only 3 left, which makes me want one. And essentially, the U.S. has decided that the ultimate strategy for creating, I'll use academics. My industry, my colleagues wake up every morning and we ask ourselves one question: how do I reduce my accountability while increasing my compensation? And we've adopted this bullshit rejectionist LVMH strategy where, despite the fact that you sit on the endowment of $53 billion, Harvard, your endowment is up 40-fold in the last 30 years, but you've increased the freshman class size 4%. Because the alumni love it, because their degree goes up in value when it gets very difficult to get in. And we've embraced the same kind of strategy as a luxury brand. We've decided that housing, and we've decided that college degrees should develop a scarcity and an aspirational value. And it's allowed us, and those in the housing industry and those in the academic industry, to raise prices faster than inflation, because there's just too few of these things for no reason other than we've decided that a great strategy is to constrain supply. Harvard could have 15,000 students, not 1,500. They have the resources, and yet they decide to keep it very small and very exclusive. In my industry, we've morphed from public servants to Chanel bags because it makes us feel important.
So let's say we could put you in charge. Let's say that, or let's say that you were having a meeting at the White House. It was for the new Trump administration or the new Harris administration, and you went over these numbers with the future presidents. It's January 2025. And that president, he or she, agrees with you and says, okay, we have a crisis. And so, I think this is one of the problems, and you and I talked about this over the summer. I think you said this to me, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 75 different advocacy groups at NYU. None of them are related to white males. They're all related to different types of people, ethnic backgrounds, et cetera, different orientations, but none for white males. So there's an epidemic going on. There's a psychological struggle going on. What are some things you would recommend from a policy initiative that would help these people?
So you mentioned something, and I just want to touch on it, and that is these problems are especially acute amongst young men. Young men are 4 times as likely to kill themselves as a young woman. After divorce, a man becomes 8 times more likely to kill himself. If you were in the morgue and there were 5 young people who died by suicide and 4 of them were men, or 4 of them were any special interest group, you might decide to weigh in with programs and try and do something. But because of the advantage that you and me received, there's a lack of empathy for young men now because we've had a 2,000-year head start, which is really a shame because empathy isn't a zero-sum game. Civil rights didn't hurt white people. Gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. But we've decided to hold a 19-year-old male accountable for the advantage that you and I received. So this has really hit young men especially hard who don't have access to some of the manufacturing jobs and middle-class jobs that were so important to young men throughout most of our history. Now, what could you do about it? There's a lot of things we could do. One, red shirt young men. They should start kindergarten at 6. Girls start at 5. Boys biologically mature later. Their prefrontal cortex is literally 18 months behind. Two 17-year-olds applying to college. The 17-year-old girl is basically competing against a 15-and-a-half-year-old. We need more males in primary school. 70 to 80% are female. It's natural that they champion a young girl, someone they see in themselves. There are more per capita female fighter pilots in the U.S. than there are male kindergarten teachers. The result is that on a behavior-adjusted basis, a boy is twice as likely to be suspended for the exact same behavior as a girl, a black boy 5 times as likely. If you are not growing your freshman seats at a college faster than population growth, and you have an endowment over $1 billion, I believe you should lose your tax-free status because you're no longer a public servant. You are, in fact, a hedge fund offering classes. I believe we need national service. I think we need young people to move from an age of grievance to an age of heroism and meet people from different sexual orientations, different ethnic backgrounds, different income levels, and realize that they're working in working in the agency of something great, and that is our nation. I think we need to do away with capital gains tax. There's absolutely no reason why we should be transferring wealth from young people to older people. I think we need expanded child tax credit. I think there's a ton of things we could do to put more money and prosperity in the pockets of young people, and at the same time give boys more of a fighting chance. On a more social level, I think we need to recognize that the single point of failure for a young boy is when he loses a male role model. And we have the second most single-parent homes. It's interesting, Anthony. Girls in single-parent homes have the same outcomes, same rates of college attendance, same rates of self-harm. Boys immediately come off the tracks and become dramatically more likely to be addicted to opioids, end up in jail. And so I think we need to recognize that while boys are physically stronger, they're mentally and emotionally much weaker. And I think we need a series of programs immediately when a boy loses a male role model, that we should weigh in with big brother programs, social programs, ability for him to find his tribe. And also just on a very personal level, guys like you and me who've recognized some success, we need to get involved in the life of a boy that isn't ours biologically. The ultimate expression of masculinity, and I think about this a lot, need to take care of yourself, need to take care of your family, need to take care of your community. But the ultimate expression of masculinity is to get involved in the life of a young boy. You don't need to be virtuous. You just need to be living a good, righteous life. And unfortunately, because of the Catholic Church and Michael Jackson, anytime a young man has love to give or care to give to a young boy, he is suspected. There's something wrong with him. There are four times as many female applicants to little sisters than there are to, big sisters than there are to big brothers. So if we want better men, we need to be better men. We need to get more involved in the lives of young men. And if you look around, Anthony, they're just so easy to find. Your assistant's a single mother. Your friends have gotten divorced. Your friends have a son who is struggling. Young men struggling are everywhere. And a lot of times all they need, there's just certain things men can provide for boys that women cannot. And there are men, literally millions of men who go through school, go through college, or don't go through college, go into the workforce and haven't had a single real male role model in their life. So there's a variety of social, economic programs. And there's also just, we need a new zeitgeist in our society that as soon as you have some success, it doesn't have to be monetary, but you're living a virtuous life, you get involved in the life of a young boy.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot people like you and I can do in that area, by the way. And I totally agree with you. And I have 4 sons, and everything you said about their rise compared to your rise or my rise is true. Now, they have the advantage of having me as a dad, of course, but they're still up against varying cultural speed bumps that I think we've put in their way, and I think we've done it unnecessarily. There's no reason for that, Scott, you know?
Well, just look at school. Look at my industry. What are the incentives? What are the behaviors we reward in school? Sit still, be organized, be a pleaser, raise your hand. You basically describe a girl. And so, and now in college, you literally have a situation where you're going to have 3 female college graduates in the next 5 years for every 2 boys. And you think, well, it's time, and that's great. Women are ascending, and we should do nothing to get in the way of that. There's been no group that's ascended faster than women globally. More women are seeking tertiary education than men right now. In terms of parliament, in the last 30 years, twice as many women have been elected to some sort of parliament electoral body. We should do nothing to get in the way of that. We also need to realize, though, that there's a weird dynamic here, and we don't like to talk about this because it feels sexist, and I've said I'm a sexist. I believe that for the most part, 95% of our population identifies as binary, and men and women are prone to different types of behavior. And in the mating market, women mate socioeconomically horizontally and up, men horizontally and down. 75% of women say economic viability is very important in a mate. It's only 25% for men. And when the pool of horizontal and up, of economically and emotionally viable men keeps shrinking every year, we end up with a lack of household formation. How many times have you heard, I know all these great women who are high character, attractive, together professionally, and they can't find a man? No, they can find a man. They just can't find a man they want to date. So the result of some weird things in the mating market, 1 out of 3 men under the age of 30 has a girlfriend, 2 out of 3 girls under the age of 30 has a boyfriend, because women are dating older and older. And because they have less money, there's a lack of household formation. And it's especially rough on men. When a guy doesn't have the prospect of a romantic relationship, he doesn't make friends. He isn't as interested in getting a job. He tends to get more involved in things like conspiracy theory, more prone to believing misogynistic or nationalist content, not leaving the house. In some, he becomes a really shitty citizen. Loneliness is no less tragic for girls, but the outcomes aren't as severe. They're better at maintaining social networks. Oftentimes, they pour that additional romantic energy into their career. So you have this entire generation of men that are kind of becoming a new species. They're very isolated. They're very lonely. They have the deepest pocketed, most talented people in the world trying to convince them they can have a reasonable facsimile of life with a screen and an algorithm. I don't need friends. I have Discord and Reddit. I shouldn't go through the humiliation of trying to get a job. I'm going to trade stocks and crypto on Robinhood and on Coinbase. I don't need to go through the rejection and effort of showering, getting in shape, having a plan, enduring the rejection involved in mating. I have YouPorn. So you have just half of millennial men have given up dating. They're not even trying. 3 million able-bodied men aren't even seeking work. So we have this kind of new species of man who is essentially alone, sequestered from the rest of society, isn't making an effort to advance his or her skills. And by the time they're in the late 20s, they're kind of unsavable. 1 out of 5 men at the age of 30 is still living with their parents. 1 out of 3 moves home after college, and they're just falling off the map. And they also become dangerous, and not. It's important not to stereotype as every incel is going to become a mass shooter. But what they do is they become dangerous to themselves. They become very likely to harm themselves. And also they just become very prone to this type of content that is very unproductive. They're less likely to believe in climate change. So without the prospect of a romantic relationship, men without those guardrails tend to sort of come off the tracks. And young men have fewer and fewer economic and romantic relationships and prosperity. Leads to lower birth rates, which takes an economy down. You want to see your economy go down? Just become a Japan, a China, or an Italy, where it turns into an inverted pyramid in terms of aging. In the U.S., we now spend 40% of all of our government services on people over the age of 65. Young people or old people have figured out they can vote themselves more and more money, and they do. And we used to have 12 young people supporting every one retiree. It's now down to 3 to 1, which means we can't make forward-leaning investments in technology and in education, which have a much greater ROI than the investments in seniors. We're going to have 12 times as many old people, a third as few people under the age of 5 in the next 30 years, which means nursery schools are going to become like zoos where old people go to stare at this creature called children. I really do think there needs to be a Marshall Plan to lift up all young people. I don't think you can target just men. I think it would be too politicized, but I think it would disproportionately help young men.
So I got a couple minutes left here. I want to keep you on time. I wanted to get all that content in because I think it's very relevant to where we are, and I think we have to figure out a way to make a change. But in reading your book, my team and I, we pulled 5 words or ideas out of the book, and I want you to just address them in one sentence so that I can get you out of here on time, Scott. So if I say the word wealth, you think of what?
The shit you can't see. Having passive income that's greater than your burn.
Okay. So there's independence, economic security, right?
Options.
Right. When I think of success, you think of what? When I say the word success?
The economic security such that there's an absence of stress in your life so you can focus on what's key, and that is your relationships without that stress.
Right. Which is a big thing for everybody, by the way. You and I experienced that growing up. I mean, that was our big thing. Okay, so rejection. I say the word rejection. You say what?
The key to success, the only thing I can guarantee you is a certain ratio of joy and tragedy in your life. Your ability to move through tragedy without losing your sense of enthusiasm is the key to success.
Right. Right. Well, you and I have that in spades. What about the word youth?
Every man under the age of 30 should be able to walk into any room and know that if shit got real, he could kill and eat everybody. Physical fitness and strength is something that should be absolutely honored, glorified, and we need to stop this bullshit where we are telling obese people that they're finding their truth. They're not. They're finding diabetes. We need to be the strongest nation in the world economically, socially, and physically.
Yeah, probably have to fix the food to do that. Okay, so last word. I say the word masculinity. You say what?
Acquiring the skills and strengths such that you can advocate for and protect others.
Okay, well, this has been fascinating. I want to keep you on time. The title of the book is The Algebra of Wealth, which gets into things like talent and passion, savings and relationships. But I think this is going to be the signature event. I mean, you know, you and I are contemporaries, my friend. If we've got another 20 to 30-year run, this could be the thing that we need to all work on to make it better for this new generation of people. But I really appreciate you joining us today on Open Book. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for your success. And also thanks for the good work you're doing. I've had you on my pod, and I think you were the most popular guest we had all year. So thanks for your influence and your good work.
Well, it's sweet of you to say. Hopefully you'll invite me back.